right, good morning again. I am so excited because I really have missed you guys greatly. I love my family, of course, above all, but you guys also are a huge part of our lives, and so we missed you over break. Good to be back, good to be worshiping together again, catching up over coffee, seeing all the littles, I love it. It's a new year. It's the year of the goat, not the Chinese zodiac, the greatest of all time. 2023, number 23, not LeBron James. Michael Jordan, of course, is who I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm just kidding. So I figured it'd be good to start the year off with like, new year, new me. That'd be a great message. No? Okay. What about the year of greatness? We could start with that too. Also, oh, you like that one? Okay. We're not going to do either of those. She's sitting down and she's like, no, we're not doing that. Don't do new year, new me. Actually, the way we're going to start off the year is the only way that made sense, and that's just to talk about Jesus. And for the rest of the year, we are going to talk about Jesus. And if you stick around long enough, we might just talk about Jesus in 2024 as well, because that's really what we're all about, right? We just want to preach Christ through the Word of God. And so we're actually going to start a new series this morning in the book of Mark, as you can see. And it's going to be a longer one. We're going to be in it for about a year and some change. But we're going to be in Mark, and we're going to look at the Gospel of Mark, the good news of Jesus as is found in Mark. But I want to give just a little bit of history around the book first, because before we start in a message series, it's good to know what we're getting into, the author, where he was writing, who he was writing to, because that will help us as we get into the context of Scripture and why, Mark portrayed it a certain way at that time. And so, the author is never actually mentioned, but most people, 99% of people agree that it's John Mark, that it's Mark. Mark was not a disciple. Mark came around a little bit later. Mark is the one that we find in Acts. He's the cousin of Barnabas, and he went with Paul and Barnabas on the first missionary journey that Paul took. Mark was a part of that journey, but then he left. If you remember, we talked a little bit about this end of Colossians, but he left to go back to Jerusalem when things were getting a little bit hard. So he went back to Jerusalem. That left kind of a bitter taste in Paul's mouth. So when the second missionary journey came around, Barnabas was like, hey, we need to take Mark with us again. And Paul's like, I don't think so. I don't think he's ready. I don't think we should take him. That created some tension between Paul and Barnabas, which caused them to split. So now Mark and Barnabas go on their missionary journey. So this is the Mark that we're talking about. Now, it's important to note, too, that Paul and Mark eventually reconciled, and Paul mentions Mark as one of his closest companions, so that was healed, that relationship. But here's another really important thing about the authorship of this book. Because Mark was not a disciple, he was not following Jesus, he was not walking with, what I mean by that is he was not walking with Jesus as he did ministry. So where did he get all of this information? It's also believed that Mark and Peter were really, really close. In fact, in 1 Peter, Peter calls Mark his son, which would be a spiritual son, but Peter and Mark were really close. So most people would agree that Mark is telling the story of Jesus in this gospel from a first-hand account from Peter. So Peter is telling Mark what happened, and Mark is writing it all down. That's what's believed to be the content of this book. The date isn't super important, but it's interesting if you care about this stuff that this was the first gospel written. In fact, a lot of people think that Matthew, Luke, and John got some of the quotes and some of the sayings from the book of Mark. But Mark was the first gospel written in about the late 50s to early 60s AD. So that's when it was written. Again, not super important, but if you like history stuff, that's about the date. And the location and the audience is very important. Mark was writing, widely believed, that he was writing from Rome and that he was writing to Roman Gentiles. So he was writing to people that were non-Jewish. Why is that important? It's important because it really influences how he writes. There's a lot of, this is kind of getting nitty-gritty, but there's some Aramaic terms that he uses that he has to expound on. He has to explain a little bit more because the readers wouldn't have at first grasped what he was saying. So he writes it to these Gentiles, which is, we talked about this also, how Matthew, we were in Ruth and Matthew, the genealogy, is how he starts, right? Because Jewish readers wanted to know about the man that was being written about. So we're going to start with the genealogy. But Gentile readers wouldn't really have cared about a genealogy. So Mark skips that part and just gets right into John the Baptist. So he's writing to these Roman Gentiles, it is believed, as he talks about Christ. Now, this gospel is like fast-paced, it's action-packed, and it's really more about the works of Jesus than it is about the teachings of Jesus. So what we're going to see in here is a lot of healing and a lot of healing the sick and healing the lame, and we are going to see some of the teachings, but it's more about how Jesus acted and more about how he served and what he did than what he said. So here's what I want to do this morning. Also, each gospel writer portrays Jesus in a different way. So Mark portrays Jesus as a servant. That's his kind of main push is God's servant. That's why he spends so much time talking about how Jesus served and what he did. So that's kind of the main way in which Jesus is portrayed in this gospel, God's servant. And then, of course, we know at the end, if you go back, well, we don't go back, but on the slide it says Servant King. That's what we're calling our message series, is Servant King. So this morning, I wanna just focus in on what I believe and what many believe to be the key verse of the whole entire book of Mark. And that's Mark 10:45. Mark 10:45. You guys can go ahead and turn to Mark 10 because we're actually going to spend some time there, though the rest of our time there this morning. But Mark chapter 10, verse 45, here's the verse, here's the key verse. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Everything in this book revolves around that statement. Now, I want to unpack it. I want to kind of take that and I want to kind of break it apart bit by bit. But I first want to give some context around why Jesus was saying that in the first place. We can't just take one verse and just preach a whole message on it. But here we try to really give a lot of context so we know why Jesus would have said that particular thing. So we're going to be in Mark 10:35 through 45. And again, the whole point of this morning is really just kind of setting some foundation and setting the stage for where we're going to be and where this whole gospel takes us as we go through it together and eventually get to, really the hope is that we get to the resurrection story in the end of Mark on Easter Sunday of 2024. That's like how it's mapped out. So like, fingers crossed, we don't power goes out and the parking lot's torn apart or something, we can't meet. We got to meet every week, all right? We have to. We're forced into it. All right, so let's read 10:35 through 45, and then we'll talk about this contextually. So, and James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, who's Jesus, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I am baptized?" And they said to him, "We are able." And Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called them to him and said to them, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So here's our big idea this morning. The big idea is this, is that Jesus set the example of servitude by lowering himself to the position of a servant and giving his life as a ransom for many. So right out of the text, Jesus set the example of servitude by lowering himself to the position of a servant and giving his life a ransom for many. We can leave that up there for just a minute. Actually, I think it's just going to stay up there. I don't have any other slides. So we'll leave that up if you guys are taking notes. But here's what's happening. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. They're walking the road to Jerusalem. They're on their way for him to be arrested. And as they're walking, he's got a big crowd following him, but more closely he has the 12 disciples. And what happens is he kind of pulls them aside, and he'll have some conversations with them, and then they'll walk some more, and then he'll pull them in and teach them, and then they'll walk some more. And right before this, he had just pulled the 12 in, and he had told them, hey, we're on the way to Jerusalem. We're on our way because the Son of Man is going to be offered up. He's going to be beaten. He's going to be arrested. He's going to be mocked, and he's going to be killed. And then on the third day, he's going to rise. So he's telling them, here's why we're going to Jerusalem. And then they continue to walk. And then, this is so crazy to me when you read it and think about this. James and John had the audacity to approach Jesus privately and say, hey, Jesus, we want you to do whatever we ask you to do, right? We're just going to ask you something, we want you to do it, okay? And Jesus is like, okay, what do you want me to do for you, you know? So that's like number one. Like, you go to the Son of God and you're like, hey, can you do whatever we ask? But then what they ask seems even crazier, right? We want to sit, Jesus, when you're in glory and we are there too. We want to sit on your left hand and your right hand. Can you grant us that privilege? I mean, that's like, think about that for a second, right? The pride and the arrogance that appears to be there. But here's an important thing to note. That question, while we sometimes read it and go, how dare they ask Jesus that? It really wasn't that far out of left field if you think about the historical context of the time. Here's what one commentator said, right? Because remember, they still believe that Jesus is on his way to set up an earthly kingdom. They're still kind of confused, like what's going to take place? You're going to how arrested? What? I thought you were going to go set up an earthly kingdom. So here's some context. Their request reflects the common practice of ancient rulers to elevate their highest ranking, most intimate family members and associates to the places of honor on either side of them. So back then, it was common that if someone had a position of influence or prominence, a ruler of a town or a city or whatever, they would take their most intimate family members, and they would give them a seat on their right and left. So what they're thinking is, hey, we've been following you, Jesus, now for a few years. You're going to set up this kingdom, and we feel really close to you, right? We know that Peter, James, and John were kind of his inner circle. We feel really close. Can we be the ones that sit there next to you? So yes, there's still some pride and arrogance there, but it's not like a random question. It was something that was very common that would have happened then. But here's what happened, right? It disregards the other 10 disciples that have been following him. So they're placing themselves above the other 10, and then this is why Jesus gathers them all, and he says, okay, I gotta rein you in here, and I gotta use this as a teaching moment. So 12 of you, come here, let's talk for a second, because the other 10 are getting kind of mad. Like, how dare you guys ask Jesus for that place? Like, what about us? Like, we're following him too. We're living the hard life too. What about us, right? So look again at verse 38. Verse 38, Jesus is pulling them in, and he says, Jesus said to them, you do not ask what you are, you do not know what you are asking. Are you, and this, by the way, let's go back. I'm fumbling. This is still to James and John, but I want to break it apart. So the 10 are getting mad, but they say, you don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism with which I'm baptized? Now, the cup and the baptism that Jesus is referring to is his suffering. Do you guys remember in Matthew 26 when Jesus is in the garden and he's praying to God before he's arrested? Do you remember what he prays to God the Father? He says, my Father, if it's possible, remove this cup from me. He says, remove the cup. The cup is a metaphorical symbol of suffering. Even in the Old Testament, we see a cup being one of suffering. So he says, are you able to take the cup that I'm about to take? Are you able to be baptized in the way that I'm going to be baptized? And again, really not understanding what he's saying, James and John are like, yes, of course. We'll follow you wherever. We'll do whatever it takes. Anything you go through, we're going through. Anything you do, we want to do. We're here with you. We're with you, Jesus. So Jesus is like, actually, you will taste this cup. One day you will. And we know from church history that 10 of the 12 disciples were martyred. Besides John and Judas. John is one of them right here, right, with Jesus, but James is one of the first ones to be martyred for his faith. So he did, in fact, taste the cup that Jesus tasted as well, to a point, right? The metaphorical cup of suffering. Then we see Jesus submitting to the Father, and he says, okay, maybe you're able to drink the cup and be baptized the way I'm baptized, but to sit at my right hand or left, it's not up to me. It's up to the Father, and it's already been decided. So Jesus in this moment shows his submission to the Father. Yes, I am God, but I submit to my Father. And then, this is where he pulls everyone in, right? So I got way ahead of myself. He pulls everyone in, they're getting frustrated, and he brings them close. And then he uses the teaching moment here, okay? 42. Jesus called them to him, all of them, and said, "You know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them." So what is the cultural norm at the time? What's normal? Well, those in authority would use that position of power to press down on those beneath them. They would lord it over those under their authority. In other words, they would take advantage of those who were under their authority. They would use their power to force submission, to force a domineering way over those who were weaker. And that was normal. So Jesus is like, hey, listen, here's how it's done in our world. Here's what the Gentile rulers do. They use their power to suppress and oppress. That's what's expected from a leader in their time. They look at people in authority, and that's what's expected. Yeah, I expect that you're going to behave that way. I expect that you're going to press down on people. That's what they're used to. But then look at verse 43. Jesus says, "But it shall not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Not so with you," says Jesus. In fact, it's the opposite. If you want to be considered great in my kingdom, then you must become the servant. You must place yourself below others and you must serve them. Then will you be considered great. Once you're able to do that, to become a servant and humble yourself to that position, then he expounds on that in verse 44. "And whoever would be first among you must be slave of all." Whoever would be first must be slave among all. So it's not just your brothers and sisters you're called to serve, but all. That would be believers and non-believers alike. All people. So here's the contrast, right? The world says, and this is for us relevant, right? You want to become great, focus on bettering yourself. Lead by example, but show real leadership, right? Be the loudest voice. Leave others behind if they're dragging you down. Do what's best for you. That's how you get to the top in our world. But then Jesus says, hey, you want to become someone great. Focus on others by leading by example. Be quick to listen and be slow to speak. Make sure everyone is good and no one is suffering or struggling. Do what's best for others, even if it requires great sacrifice from you. You see the difference there, right? Worldly being first, Christ-like being first. And then here it is, right? The key verse of all of it. So he's using this as a teaching moment. They're arguing, they're bickering. I want to be here. No, I want to sit here. How can you do that? I want to be at the highest point of prominence. And Jesus says, listen, even the Son of Man came not to serve, but to be served, and to give his life a ransom for many. Even the Son of God, the one who deserves the place of prominence, the one who deserves the place of power. He says, even me, I'm not excluded from this principle. Even me, the Son of God, must humble himself and be a servant to all. He must set the example of servitude so that others will follow. And the road of service will inevitably lead to suffering. So, not only are we called to serve, but we're called to probably, eventually, suffer. We're called to serve and be ready to give ourselves sacrificially for others. Now, are we going to die a martyr's death? I would submit to you that probably we are not. But most of the disciples would die a martyr's death. A lot of people in church history have suffered a martyr's death. People currently today still do die a martyr's death. Suffering comes to those who are willing to sacrifice much for the cause of Christ. But that sacrifice that we are called to is one of self-emptying and others elevating. That's the sacrifice that we're making. It's not about me. It's not about me being first. It's not about me gaining a position of power over others. It's about me humbling myself and coming under and submitting to the authority of Christ and then being a servant to all. And Jesus says, listen, I deserve to be in this position, but even me, even I have come to serve, not to be served, but to serve. So let's get back to him. Let's talk about Jesus. I promised you we would, all right? The Son of Man. He came to serve, And he came to set an example, but most importantly, he came to give his life a ransom for many. So yes, he came to walk this earth, to do ministry, to go through things like temptation, to be tempted by Satan in the desert so that he could empathize and understand our temptation. He didn't fall into it, of course, but he came to experience pain, to experience hurt, to experience joy, to experience the good things about humanity, but to experience the bad things, the hurtful and painful things about being a human so that he could relate to us, so that he could empathize with us. He did that. He walked this earth, he taught, and was one of the most revolutionary, radical teachers because of what he was teaching. But most importantly, he came to give his life a ransom for many. Well, what does that mean? Ransom is something that is paid to give someone, or I guess someone, freedom from captivity, right? Typically, we look at, we watch movies and it's like there's a kidnapper and now they want a ransom, right? And so ransom is paying something back or paying somebody to get something back. Humanity, while once created to live in perfection and relationship with Jesus, is now held captive by sin. We're created in perfection, but sin enters the world, and now as a result of that, we are all held captive by sin. Sin enters the world, and now our destiny is eternal separation from God. But God doesn't leave us there. He doesn't want to leave us there. He wants to buy us back. He wants to ransom us from our captivity and reinstate us into his family. And that ransom must be paid by the sacrifice of a perfect lamb. The only one who's able to do that is Jesus. He's the only perfect being to ever live, and so by the shedding of his blood, we are ransomed back. That is the payment. The payment is not millions of dollars, right? The payment is the blood of Jesus, and so he offers that as a ransom for many, right? Like here's the payment, sin. Here's the payment, Satan, ruler of the power of the air. Like here's the payment, I'm buying them back. So he ransoms many. And this is what the whole book of Mark is pointing to. This is what everything points to, starting with John the Baptist paving the way. Then we see Jesus performing miracles and healing those who are lame, who are blind, who are sick, serving those who have been forgotten, serving those who have been thrown out, and all of it is on his way to Jerusalem. So here in chapter 10, this is going to take us a while to get here, but chapter 10, he's on the road to Jerusalem. He's entering the final weeks of his life. All of it points to that moment on the cross, the excruciating suffering that he's going to endure on the cross. All of this points to that, the ransoming act. So I'm sure if we went around the room this morning, we would probably have like all kinds of different New Year's resolutions, right? We'd have like all different unique ones. We'd probably also have a lot of very similar ones. Has anyone noticed, this is a sharp turn, okay, but we're just going to do application now. Has anyone noticed a lot more people out running in your neighborhoods lately? Last couple of weeks, I've noticed like a lot of people running, right? And you're like, wow, it must be January, but check back in a month. We'll see how many people are still running. But we have all these things, right? A lot of it's physical activity. I'm gonna run. I'm gonna be more healthy. I'm gonna exercise, and I'm gonna do these things, right? Some of it is, spiritual. Like I'm gonna read more, and I'm gonna pray more, and I'm gonna go to church more. Whatever it is, I'm gonna do more of this thing, something that's healthy, something that's good for me, right? What if our resolutions for the year were centered on more of Jesus? What if we resolved to spend more time in the Word? Like, what if we resolved to spend more time in prayer, right? What if we resolved to serve people in our lives more? But not just that, what if it was really, really specific, right? Like, we're making the connection here. Like, I didn't come to be served, but to serve. So for us, we need to serve, okay? So make it specific. I think one of the ways we get ourselves in trouble with New Year's resolutions is we try to achieve like way too much too fast. And we go from like one extreme to the other. So it's like, man, I don't read my Bible at all, and now I'm going to read for 30 minutes a day all year. And it's like, man, that's a big bite to take. So why don't you start with like, hey, I'm going to read 3 times a week for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to try to progressively get better, right? So instead of setting these like sometimes unattainable goals, maybe get specific and say, hey, I'm going to do three times a week, but the goal is finding a healthy daily habit of Bible intake. So my goal is this, and here's some of the ways I can do that. I'm going to read 3 times a week, and then I'm going to try to bump it up to 4, maybe 5, and I'm going to work towards that. But when we set these super high, lofty goals, we beat ourselves down because it's really hard to stick by them, right? But what if, think about this, serving, what if we resolve to serve the community once a month as an individual, a couple, or a family? So what if we found a local ministry, and there's plenty around here. There's so many nonprofit organizations just in our area. One of the ones that we had the most fun serving at with our student ministry was Dorcas Ministries. We'd go back to Dorcas, and we'd go in the back and just sort things. And I don't know what it was. I mean, I like reading books, but I'm not I wouldn't call myself like a book nerd. But they have this massive room, and it's just wall to wall, floor of, did you ever come with us to do this? And the whole entire floor was boxes of books. That's the biggest things that get donated. So what we did is we would just go box by box, and we would just sit there and just take books out, and if they're falling apart, they go in the trash. If they're this kind of book, you put them here. And you're just sorting books. But you're helping them as they're trying to serve the community by offering cheaper, alternatives. But it was cool because I'm pulling out books, and I'm like, man, this thing looks old. 1907, holy smokes. And I'm like, this is a really old book, and it was cool. And, you're sorting Legos and games, but there's also volunteers, and you're hanging out, and it's fun. But you do that as a family, right? Maybe you're going to resolve to serve at a local outreach once a month, and you're going to, hey, we're going to partner with this one for this year, and once a month we're going to go and serve. What would it look like in our neighborhoods? What if we looked at our neighborhoods as a mission field, right? What if you look at your neighbors and your streets and the cross sections and all of that as this is my mission field. This is the people who I've been called as a local missionary to serve. What would it look like? What would it look like to? I know a few of us in here have these solo stove bonfire portable little campfire things. What would it look like to put that at the end of your driveway once a month when it's cold, and just say, hey, we're going to do s'mores and hot dogs. Just come stop by, right? Come stop by. We're going to give you guys some s'mores, and then you just engage in conversation, and you're kind of serving them in that way, right? Maybe you guys have a pool in your neighborhood. In the summertime, you're like, hey, once a month, we're gonna just sacrifice a little financially, and we're just gonna buy 20 pizzas, and we're just going to invite whoever wants to come. We're just going to have a big pizza party at the pool. We're going to provide it and use it as an opportunity just to serve others and to get to know our neighborhood. What if it was things like that where you're going, hey, once a month, how can we serve our neighborhood? We used to have someone in our church, in our previous ministry, that would do, on Halloween, they would go with a grill out on their street and just flip hot dogs and just hand hot dogs out as people walk by. That was their service to people. So what would it look like to do things for your neighborhood and to look at it as, hey, I didn't come to be served, but I came as a result of Jesus. Now I got to serve as well. Now, giving our lives a ransom for many, of course, we can't do, but we are called to serve, and we're called to live in that way. And here's the beautiful thing about the book of Mark, right, as we close. The beautiful thing about the book of Mark is that most weeks we're going to learn how to do those things. We're going to learn how to interact with others. We're going to learn how to reach out to those that are broken, those that are hurting, those that are sick. We're going to learn how Jesus did it, and we're going to try to take that and bring it into our lives and bring it into our church, and we're going to try to serve others in that way. So maybe you're going, hey, that sounds great, Adam, being a local missionary in my neighborhood, cool. I don't really know exactly what that looks like. Well, we're going to learn a lot of how, some things we can do. They didn't have Halloween back then, but I'm sure you could do something on Halloween. But how do we serve people, right? How do we get into their lives and get to know them and meet their needs and try to get deep into their lives so that we can understand what they're struggling with and what's going on in their lives so that we can try to help and meet those needs. The powerful thing about prayer too, man, some of you guys are prayers, and some of you guys, it's not a strong discipline yet. I pray that it would become that. It wasn't for me for a long time, but just the last couple years, I've kind of been forced into praying a lot as a church planter, because if you don't, then you're probably not going to be successful. But now I've developed a more consistent, healthy habit of prayer. But one of the most powerful things you can do, especially with someone who's a non-believer, is when you're talking to them, and they're telling you what's going on in their life, and they're man, I had a tough week or whatever because job stuff, and just going, hey man, I don't know where you stand on this, but can I just pray for you? And just taking that moment to pray, it speaks volumes to them, even if they're not a believer. So even serving them in that way, I'm just going to pray for you right now. I'm going to pray for what's going on. They may not even pray with you. They might not even bow their heads. I remember one time I had some old friends come over, and we were talking, and I just felt burdened in the moment to pray. This was years ago. And I prayed, and I know, because when I said amen and opened my eyes, they both were just staring at me. So I'm pretty sure they were staring at me like the whole time, which I'm glad I didn't know because it would have been super awkward. But it doesn't matter. Like you take that moment and you say, hey, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for what's going on in your life because I believe that God is a God who listens and God is a God who cares and God is a God of healing and God is a God of restoration. And like you use that moment to serve by praying for others. We see Jesus intentionally pursue the broken, the sick, the hurting, and we will be compelled to do the same, I believe, as we go through this book together. So, Jesus came to not be served, but to serve, to set the example, to provide his life as a ransom for many. We will see so much of how that plays out starting next week in chapter 1. I hope you guys are ready. I'm pretty pumped to preach through Mark because I've said it before, I just love preaching Jesus. If I could get up here and just talk about Jesus every single Sunday, which we try to, that's just, how much better can it get? So let's pray. We'll sing a couple more songs. We're going to do communion together this morning, and then we'll get on with our Sunday, I guess, after church. So let's pray together. God, thanks for today, and thank you for your word, and I'm looking forward, God, to just diving into this book together and really coming face to face with Jesus, hopefully in a fresh way as we kind of go slowly through this book and as we take each section and we get deep into it and we try to learn from how Jesus responds and how he teaches and how he interacts with people and how he goes out of his way to meet certain people. And God, I pray that we would gain much from it. And as we grow deeper in faith and knowledge of you, God, I pray that we would do it all for your glory, that we would do it with the intent of glorifying you. We want to grow in faith to glorify you. We want to pursue Jesus deeply because we want to glorify you. So just, God, give us a great time together over the next year going through this book, through this gospel, and teach us a lot. Reveal much to us, convict us, challenge us, encourage us, and ultimately, God, make it a sweet time of learning together, again, for your glory. Now, God, as we sing, I pray that you would just take any distractions that we might have out of the way and let us just sing to you with all we have because you deserve it. And as we take communion together, God, let it be a sweet time of remembrance for what Jesus did, that ransom that was paid through his blood on our behalf. Such a beautiful thing. Let us not miss that. Love you. In your son's name, amen.
So feel free to